This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, brought to you by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I'm your host Gilad Halpern, and today's interview is being recorded on the premises of the 2016 conference of the Association of Israel Studies here in Jerusalem. My guest today is a professor of political science at Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, who has recently completed a study of the Druze community in Israel, an indigenous ethnic and religious group that sees itself as separate from the Arab-Palestinian community and therefore espouses a wholly different relationship with the Jewish community. Professor William Miles, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello, Gilad.
So the Druze are, on the surface, caught between a rock and a hard place, but in fact, as your research shows, it actually does them good.
Does them very well. Because they identify fully with the Israeli sector of society. They feel themselves as part of the Jewish people by extension. I learned a lot about Torah and interpretations of Torah from the Druze perspective.
Mm-hmm. Such as, this sounds really fascinating.
Well, most fundamentally, we Jews must thank the Druze. For actually existing, because who was Moses' wife?
Zipporah?
Zipporah, yes. Yeah. Okay, and who was Zipporah? Zipporah was the daughter of a Druze prophet. So this is part of Druze history, religion, faith, that Midianite, who gave his daughter to Moshe Rabbeinu, was himself a Druze.
Okay. And here is perhaps a good point to say something about the Druze religion that is somewhat a distant cousin of Islam, but not quite.
Right. So it's considered to be a break-off of Islam, at least that's what historians of religion say. 800 years ago, they decided that their prophethood would not end or be inclusive entirely of Muhammad. First, let us say that everybody knows that you cannot know the Druze religion, that it is a secret, or at least that's what they say. Actually, there are aspects of the Druze religion which are secret even to the Druze themselves. Unless they have taken a vow to become religious, to become orthodox in the way that we know, they themselves are not allowed to have access to those holy books, to know the true secrets. So what I know is what is allowed to be known outside of the circle, the secret circle of the initiates of the Druze religion. And prominent among that is the fact that the most holy of the 5 prophets whom they revere is he who has manifested himself several times throughout history, because they don't have a linear notion of history but a cyclical one. And in the time of Moses, he was there, Yitro, Jethro. And even before the notion of the Druze religion actually crystallized, he was a founding prophet of what would later become thousands and thousands and thousands of years later become known as the Druze.
Okay, so now putting on your researcher's hat, is there really a long-standing, years-long link between the Druze and the Jews, or is it just some sort of folkloristic thing that is really the outcome of the current situation?
So this is something that has been cultivated for, you could say, political reasons or expediential reasons or survival reasons among the Druze in Israel per se. So I think, of course, not being initiated into those secret books, that there must be a reference somewhere or an interpretation somewhere of Yitro as the founding member of the Druze and giving, therefore, his daughter to the Jewish people, or the Hebrew people at the time, is what gave rise to who Jews are today. Now, certainly that is not emphasized among the Druze religious training, schooling, education in Syria, for example, or in Lebanon.
That's why I asked.
Right, okay. But certainly in Israel it is. And as I always tell my students, it is impossible to think of any religion as being a-national. Every religion, including Judaism, takes on the characteristics of the nation, the culture in which the practitioners of that religion live. So that American Judaism is not the same as British Judaism, is not the same as Israeli Judaism. And Druze religion in Israel emphasizes certain things, such as the link between the Jewish people and the Druze people going all the way back to Yitro in ways that is not emphasized in other Jewish communities in other countries.
But let's focus on current politics.
Yes,
I mean, in the state of Israel, since its establishment, how would you define the relationship of the Druze community with the Jewish state, as opposed to that of the Arab Palestinians?
Well, a basic decision was made by the leadership of the Druze that their sons would be conscripted into the Israeli military services on a par with Jewish citizens of Israel. Now, that is a clear difference from the situation of Palestinian citizens of Israel. Arabs who have Israeli citizenship certainly are not members of the Israeli Defense Forces.
And is that really the key to their integration into Israeli society?
Well, that had been the story, and that's the classical story, and that's what most Israeli Jews understand of the Druze. And virtually all contacts and social contacts that I've heard about between Israeli Jews and Druze Israelis is through military.
Yeah.
And that's one of the complaints that the Druze have.
The Druze, not the Jews.
That the Druze have.
Yeah, but not the Jews.
But
the
not
Jews
the Druze.
are happy with
that. The Jews
that.
are very happy. The Jews are very happy with the relationship that they have with their Druze fellow soldiers. And I'll give you what I consider a funny example of my Druze host where I do my research. I had him over for Shabbat dinner, and I asked him if he had ever witnessed one before. And he kind of laughed, and he said, "Oh, yes, many times." I said, "Oh, really? Where?" "In the army." I said, "Oh, how's that?" I said, "Oh, well, there are many times in which they're missing a tenth for a minyan, and they'd invite me." But I said, "But you're not Jewish." But he said, "But this is the army, and you fill in when you have to, where you have to." So, in that sense,
the Druze are Jewish by default.
They're Jewish by default, particularly in the army. But what happens after the army? That's a complaint that I heard over and over again, that they're forgotten about. That it's as if the Israeli Druze is a soldier, and that's how Israeli Jews know them and know of them and continue to remember them. But that's what they do when they're young men. Okay?
Yeah, because one aspect of integration of a certain community into the greater society is not just about the cultural sense of belonging that I'm sure is strong in this case, but also about, and that's why I said the relationship with the Jewish state, because there's a lot of other things involved, predominantly the distribution of wealth. How are the Druze affected by the fact that it is the Jewish state in this sense, and giving the Jews a privileged status in this country, yet they are not 100% the enemy, namely the Arab Palestinians? Right.
So it's a classic on the one hand and on the other hand situation. So they definitely are Israeli citizens, and they have job opportunities that by virtue of their identity as Druze, and as long as they can maintain that differentiation in the eyes of the Jewish majority, that they're not Arab, they're not Palestinian, they do get positions that otherwise would be restricted. On the other hand, when questions of distribution of resources on a collective level come up, they feel that they're not getting their share shake. That they look at the neighboring Jewish community, for instance, of a similar size, and they see greater infrastructure, more playgrounds, more this and more that, and they say, why is that? Now, it's not discrimination in the sense of the Jewish state, Israel as such is trying to deprive them, but it's like politics anywhere. You give to he whom you know, and he who makes the most noise, and the squeaky wheel is the one that gathers the most attention. And Druze by temperament are not squeaky wheels.
Does, the experience of the past, I don't know how many decades, gradually turn them into squeaky wheels? I mean, are they more vociferous than they were in the early days?
They're learning. The younger generation are learning, and a former commander in the IDF, a Druze, told me, look, we have to realize that we shouldn't become friars. Mm-hmm. Now, incorporating the notion of a friar that is a sucker, is a very Israeli notion. Mm-hmm. Something that
of doing something without getting enough in return.
Right, right. And it's a minority of Druze who are going to be that assertive. And even he is not one to protest and to demand in that sense. But it's a slow changing of mentality.
Do you think it's going to redefine the relationship of the Druze community with the state at some point? Maybe not in the immediate future, but are these really tectonic movements that we're seeing the beginning of?
No, I don't think so, because what it is saying is that they are trying to become real Israelis in the sense of not just being supportive of Israel as good Israeli loyal citizens, which has been the classic case up until now, but they're going to be kvetching and they're going to be making demands and showing their unhappiness the way most Israelis do.
Yeah, it's funny that the one aspect of their Israelization is learning not to be a friar.
Right.
That is self-defeating in a way. I want to ask
but I don't see it as self-defeating. Self-defeating in what sense?
In the sense that they will lose their position, the current relationship that they have with the state that benefits them over other non-Jewish minorities in this country.
Well, yes, but it's a compromise, and if you're going to get anywhere in this society, you have to make noise. Mm-hmm. And they've basically...
You don't think it's going to backfire? Because sorry, but that brings me to my next question, which is... Okay, so they are really trying hard to become full-fledged Israelis, but there's really one significant bone of contention, and that is that they're not Jewish. So can they, at the end of the day, ever even aspire to be fully Israeli?
Yes, because being Druze means being a minority. And this is one of the parallels that I found, and one of the reasons why I felt so comfortable. As myself being a diaspora Jew and coming from this... All right, let me give you just two numbers, okay?
Yes,
I'm not a statistician. The percentage of Jews in America. Here we are at the 2016 AIS conference, and there were no less than 5 panels, okay, devoted to the role of American Jewry vis-a-vis Israel. Mm-hmm. Percentage of American Jews in the United States, 1.9%, less than 2%.
Yeah.
And yet... you can't not hear about them, okay? They're so important. Percentage of Druze in Israel is just about the same, 1.7%, so insignificant difference. And these are Israelis. Very few of that 1.9% of American Jews have actually taken up Israeli citizenship as well.
Yeah.
But the Druze are full Israeli citizens. Mm-hmm. How come they're not getting that attention? And one of the reasons is because of that fixed notion that Druze are good for the army. Mm-hmm. They'll serve and they'll help us out, and then we don't have to think about them anymore.
That's because it is... I don't know, to me it seems very obvious. It is the Jewish state, therefore, in order to be 100% Israeli, you have to be Jewish. All other non-Jews can be maybe more, 99% Israeli, but not 100%.
This is where I was getting. So the Druze, like Jews up until the establishment of the Israeli state, are a minority, a religious minority. And that's actually so much part of their religion and culture that they don't aspire to statehood or autonomy. I mean, there was a period in Lebanon for a time under colonialism in which they did have semi-autonomy or semi-independence. But the fact is, they are comfortable with being a minority. Mm-hmm. Wherever they are, they're a very small minority. And their religion says that you go with the laws of the state, and if they're in a Jewish state, they will accept that as long as they can practice their religion. And in Israel, there is no impediment to practicing the Druze religion, then they're perfectly fine with that. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that 20% approximately of Israeli citizens are not Jewish in the first place, but are Israeli citizens, we can talk about the social and cultural reality of that, but they don't have any problem being a small minority within a larger Jewish state. I mean, they all right, go ahead.
No, please.
Well, they look at the alternatives, okay?
That's exactly what I was going to ask. Okay. One thing about the Druze, as you said, they are a minority across the Middle East. There are communities in Lebanon and in Syria and other places that are not the most fun countries to be living in at the moment.
Right.
So is part of this Israelization process that the Druze have undergone, has it driven them apart from the brethren across the border?
I don't think it's driven them apart. I mean, they still feel the kinship, so much to the extent that when their Druze cousins in Syria are being killed by al-Nusra or other fundamentalist Islamist groups, they are pained. They're very much pained. And so they then exercise their power as Israelis to try to lobby the Israeli government and the Israeli military to please God, let's do something. Let's help our cousins.
They haven't been very successful at that, have they?
Well, I have been assured that even though it's not publicized,
right,
there have been interventions by the Israeli military specifically with the aim of defending the Druze. So they very much retain that kinship and identification with Druze elsewhere. On the other hand, there's no question of swapping their citizenship or giving up their Israeliness, which they cultivate, which they believe in, which they embrace, because they know that they've got the best deal in the Middle East. And so, in every conversation I would have, that would finally lead up to their grievances. And I mentioned one of them, inequity in distribution for local municipality infrastructure, or the fact that the difficulty of getting permits to extend their residential areas and the residential homes. The fact that there isn't enough building space for the younger generation. Legitimate grievances. But they would never end the conversation like that. They would always end the conversation with, thank God we're in Israel.
Do you think the Israeli establishment recognizes that and at some point would, perhaps make more serious gestures to...
No, I think that the squeaky wheels have to get a little louder.
And they're getting there, as you said.
And I think they're getting there. They're starting to get there. But the problem, of course, is Israel has so many other problems and so many priorities that to get heard and to be taken seriously in the current environment is not easy for a group which is not problematic.
Yeah.
Is not threatening Israel. To the contrary, is helping Israel defend itself. And another interesting statistic is of all the ethnic groups who serve in the Israeli army, it's the Druze who have the highest percentage, above the Jews.
Highest percentage of what?
Of enlisting, of eligible males, because the females are exempt from the draft. That's one difference. But you have more Druze serving in the
because probably
army.
They subscribe to that legend or that long-standing understanding that this is really the key into Israeli society.
That's part of it. And part of it also, we must admit that although it's changing, the career path for the Druze doesn't seem as open, as pluralistic as for the Jewish majority. So that you've got to go through the military if you're going to get some basic education and training in areas that are going to help you in your post-military career. So a lot of them see it as a good economic opportunity for their future. A lot of them, as I'm sure Israeli Jews do as well, see it as a great social opportunity.
Yep.
But particularly for those who are living in smaller, more closed societies, as Druze is, maybe I shouldn't use the word closed, but more...
self-contained.
Self-contained, thank you. That this is an opportunity to explore the greater world in ways that for a young Tel Avivian is not going to be in the same way.
Sure. Okay, this is all very interesting, but I'm afraid this is all we have time for today. Professor William Miles of the Political Science Department at Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you very much for joining us today and talking to us about the Druze.
My pleasure.
And also big thanks to Alex Benish, our sound engineer, and to the Van Leer Institute for the generous support. If you like this podcast, there are many more where it came from. Just go to www.tlv1.fm/podcasts and take your pick.
בעצם את פה לידי, אני הולך איתך, בעצם את לידי. אני אוכל איתך, אני מחבק אותך, אני נושם אותך, ואז טוב לי זיווה.